Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie.
Welcome after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, the second panel will be devoted to Ukraine in the external world, foreign policies of Ukraine, new opening Ukraine, Russia and European Union. Our panelists are Katarzyna Pełczyńska-Nałęcz, Director of ForumIdei at the Batory Foundation, former Polish ambassador to Russia, Viktor Andrusiv, Executive Director in the Ukrainian Institute of the Future, and Nicolas de Lacoste, Deputy Director of the Continental Europe. Well, we are given an hour and a half. It's definitely too short a time, but we'll try to answer the greatest possible number of doubts, questions. My very first question will be directed at Madame Pełczyńska-Nałęcz, as the person who also Russia knows inside out because of her function of ambassador there. Well, we hear about the need or willingness to certain corrections in Normandy format, and we can clearly see certain movement as for possible talks to Russia, among other things, about Donbass. What can we really expect in the nearest months to come in this area? Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I would say that it's a truly surprising moment in international relations when the Russian factor, the one that we used to treat as extremely unpredictable, unstable, now it is in fact the most stable element in the puzzle. Russia wants from Ukraine exactly the same thing that they wanted during the annexation of Crimea, at the time when they inspired conflict and supported separatists in eastern Ukraine and really started the Russian-Ukrainian war. So what Russia really wants is a situation in which the eastern part of Ukraine, the one constructed by DNR and NR today, is no longer a part of the federation. Because what Russia needs is not the land, what they need is an instrument that would ensure a long-term stable impact of Russia on the internal situation and foreign policy of Ukraine. Everything that happens in Ukraine now and everything that happens in Europe is not really changing the Russia's position. What's more, the status quo in fact makes Russian position stronger and their interests more achievable because of a whole range of external factors, and the external factors, the context changed drastically. We'll talk about it in greater detail, I guess, because today when you look at Russian-Ukrainian relations and Russia politics on Ukraine, well, during the previous session, in fact, we talked about the situation in Ukraine itself, the situation that has changed drastically. However, the paradox is the dramatic change, perhaps, as you can hear it with more and more hopeful voices, maybe it will be changed for the better, but I would risk saying that it has no significant impact on international potential of Ukraine and its ability to resist Russia's pressure, the pressure that for the last 5 years has continued. However, what really makes it possible to push through Russian interests are the situation in the US, the situation in Europe, the situation in specific EU member states, different things. And also the internal situation in Russian Federation itself. This factor shall attract our attention, and all the time it's I would say, at a very initial stage of development. Maybe in some time, Russia will not be able to fulfill its imperialistic plans or ambitions. This is the future, but the current situation is rather unchanging. Thank you very much. The second question I would like to address at Viktor Andrusiv. Well, one of the fundamental question marks in the relation between Ukraine and Russia is the issue of what the new government can accept in Donbass. What possible solutions from the point of Ukraine would be acceptable, and where the red line is, the red line that must not be crossed by Zelensky's government?
When we talk on what they can agree, I mean the new political elite, I would say, not even just political authority. It's a question actually what the people can allow them to adopt, because the question of how the conflict will be resolved depends on what population of Ukraine will accept or not accept. We have now a lot of manipulative sociology, which shows, for example, that 70% of people want to have peace, and this is absolutely right. But when you try to talk with people how they understand peace, when you ask them, do you agree that, for example, some representatives of these republics will be in the parliament, or that they will have their own police and other things, then it appears that people do not accept this. They would not go for this kind of peace. And this is a big challenge for Mr. Zelensky, in regard that when he uses the word peace, what he really means about. So he thinks that there should be stopped all the shellings and shootings. And here is the biggest trap of the peace process, because actually it's very strange that the shellings are not stopped for the moment, because for Putin it would be a very nice story. So he gave us back our prisoners, and so he looks like a peaceful guy. Just it's important just to stop shellings, but he doesn't, and this is a point of his strategy and the biggest trap for Zelensky in the nearest future. The problem is if Putin will achieve the shellings will be stopped, it would mean that he really controls these territories. So for everybody, if he will provide this stop of shellings, it would mean that he controls the territory. So for him, it is important to show that he cannot influence the positions of the local power of this terrorist republic. And I'm sure he will demand from Zelensky to negotiate this issue with these republics to stop shellings. And this, I think, will be the first step to move in a peace process, because any of the Minsk provisions will not work until the shellings will be not stopped. So, and for the next Normandy meeting, it's a huge challenge that Zelensky will be convinced by the all parties that he need to have this short negotiation with these republics to stop shellings. And here we have a lot of also bad signs from European Union. As far as you know, that Macron in his speech to diplomats, he said that he need to look, and Europe need to look for the cooperation with Russia and to find the new strategy under which they can work together. So it means that Crimea and Ukraine are going out of the European agenda, and especially facing the financial crisis. And in this regard, we in our institute, we prognose that the pressure on the first some peaceful steps will be from the European side, not Russian side. Also, I would like to add some very important issues, because in our institute we developed alternative strategy how to resolve this conflict. you have to understand the very important issues. We create the models of all the possible scenarios for resolving the conflict. And there was no a good scenario for Ukraine. Even if tomorrow the Russian troops will go home and take all their terrorists and other, we are not able to come there. We have no enough resources to rebuild this territory, to repay all the social issues we should repay for 5 years, and so on. It's around 20 or 30 billion dollars, and of course we don't have that money. And if we just come without any economic agenda or other issues, we were not able to control the territories. So for the moment, our prediction is that this conflict cannot be resolved at the situation as it is like. The conflict will be long term because it's already 5 years, and 5 years it's already mid-term conflict. Normally, after that period, it goes to the long term. So even if there will be some progress in peaceful talks or peaceful approaches, the final solutions are very cannot be achieved, because any small step, any small conflict, any small debate can ruin the whole process. For example, if for example we elect somebody from that part, how these people will enter the parliament? What, for example, some MPs who were in the war, what they will do with that people, and so on. So any condition, any small situation can ruin the whole peaceful process. So what especially in our institute, what we propose, we are not able to take the territory back for the moment, so we propose to take back the people. The idea is to create the favorable conditions that people should move from the occupied territory to the controlled territory. So for this regard, also we want to promote the investment and international aid. For example, if with use of international aid we build houses close to the investment factories or other kind of jobs that people from the occupied territories can do, this is very pragmatic model, and which understandable also for Europe and for Ukraine. Yes, so we take people, they have job, and we have international support, we provide them with social issues and so on. So the more people we take out of the occupied territories, the more Putin should pay for to hold them, to survive the territories. So this model of this separatist republic will not work longer than 10 years, because it will be a huge money even for Putin to preserve these territories. So we propose this strategy, but for the moment, Zelensky, he really hopes that he will have a luck and a chance to establish peace. But the whole factors shows that this is not possible, and I think in half a year he will come to this conclusion also.
Dziękuję. I moje
Thank you very much. And my third question to Nicolas de Lacoste.
One of the responses of the countries of the Western world, European Union and United States, one of the responses to the aggression politics of Russia were sanctions. As far as we know, as far as what diplomats are saying, it's becoming more and more difficult to prolong sanctions for the next terms, and there are more and more voices saying that we should lift sanctions, although Russia's politics has not changed. My question to you is, well, where does this come from? And maybe your view on the situation is different than what I've presented. And a broader question, what did Emmanuel Macron think, and I'm referring to what Viktor Andrusiv said, when he said about the need to broaden dialogue with Russian Federation? In what direction should this dialogue go, and what position does Ukraine and the Donbass take?
It's a pleasure to be in Warsaw, and it's a pleasure to take part in this debate. As a French diplomat, I will try to give you some words about our policy towards Ukraine, towards Russia, and a state of play inside the Normandy format. There are plenty of things which have been said this morning and right now, which I can agree with or I cannot agree with. I will try to present you. I'm sorry not to be speaking in Polish, although I understand your language as I've been posted in Warsaw some times ago, 20 years ago. So first of all, on the sanctions issue, we have very clearly said that sanctions will not be lifted before there is progress on the resolution of the conflict in Donbass. My neighbor next to me just said that it is probable that the issue of Donbass will disappear from the agenda, international agenda. On the contrary, the policy of France, together with Germany, is to put Ukraine on the forefront of the international agenda and to say to Russia, look, there is a new reality now in Kiev. You have a new president who will be in its position for 5 years with a strong Rada, with people in Ukraine wanting peace, and this was said this morning by our Ukrainian expert. So it's not that Ukraine will step back. On the contrary, we are asking Russia for concrete steps and concrete decisions, concrete progress. What we can say, and I'm now referring to the last question you asked to the panel, to the first panel. There are good news. There are good news coming from Donbass. We've seen this exchange of prisoners, which was something important, which had not taken place for the last 2 years. And for the Ukrainian public opinion, this exchange of prisoners was extremely important. Second issue, we've seen the level of violence, the number of ceasefire violations in Donbass falling quite substantially. We've seen an amelioration of the situation in Stanitsa Luhanska. We have now a president in Kiev who has developed a people-oriented policy towards people in the separatist regions. He wants to talk to them when the policy of the former Ukrainian government was completely different. So there is a new state of play in Kiev. There is a new will to get through. And what France and Germany are doing is accompanying this negotiation between Ukraine and Russia and to have some progress. Of course, the negotiations itself is not in the Normandy format. The Normandy format is some kind of a political umbrella. The actual negotiation is taking place in Minsk, inside the trilateral contact group, which is, by the way, meeting today. And we'll see if there are some progresses which are being made. Now, on sanctions, because you precisely asked sanctions, I repeat, as far as France is concerned, we have said sanctions will remain in place till the Minsk agreements are not put into life. Of course, there are debates inside the EU, but I must say that during the last 2 years, this debate has not been so bitterly fighted. Each time we have to renew the sanctions, Chancellor Merkel and President Macron, now Macron, it was François Hollande. They present the situation. They see, are there any changes? Are we getting closer to the entry into life of the Minsk Agreement? Well, the answer is no. Unfortunately, there is no progress. So we maintain the sanctions. We have very precise criteria for the lifting of sanctions. Until these criteria are not met, there will be no lifting of sanctions. So if I can reassure my Ukrainian neighbor, the conflict in Donbass will remain very high on the agenda. And I would say not only the conflict in Donbass, but all the frozen conflicts which we have, unfortunately, on our continent. And one of the ideas in this proposal from the French president towards Russia is to speak about this frozen conflict, to speak about Georgia, to speak about Transnistria, to speak about all these places that we have in Europe, and to see how much we can go ahead. And let me tell you, for people in Georgia, for instance, who are really worry about the fact that the Georgian Abkhazia and South Ossetia will disappear from the agenda, it is, we are telling them, yes, we are discussing about these issues with Moscow, and for them it is important that these issues do not disappear from the international agenda.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you. The second round of questions, the first question to Ms. Pełczyńska-Nałęcz, it regards EU politics towards Ukraine. We are in a situation where, in a more global context, the most basic objectives from some time ago were implemented. Association agreement, free trade association, visa-free movement, Eastern Partnership. Well, there are some issues when it comes to Eastern Partnership. And the question is, what the European Union and its member states could and should propose to Ukraine and other Eastern Partnership countries to make the cooperation more vivid, to set new goals, because new goals can motivate governments to make sure to achieve them. Is there a possibility in this political situation to set new goals, new ambitions with this regard? I would like to draw your attention to a change which has happened over the last years in European Union politics, but in particular with respect to neighbourhood policy, also Eastern neighbourhood, and this is an element of a broader process. It is not a coincidence that the proposals of neighbourhood policy commissioner are given to Hungary, while the commissioner and the area of the protection of our model of life becomes linked not to democracy or rule of law or promotion of the European model of life in the closest neighborhood, but it becomes linked to migration, and this area is proposed to Greece. This is not a coincidence. This shows that today thinking about the European mode of living concentrates on the thinking about the South, about migration, about pressure regarding to the arrival of, the uncontrolled influx of people to Europe. And the thing which is totally obvious some time ago, which is the fact that for Europe to be stable, for Europe to thrive, for our standards to thrive, it is absolutely essential to build our neighborhood, to make sure standards are upheld there. And I totally understand that it is the responsibility of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to say that it's important, but it's my obligation to say, well, it's not important today for many reasons, although it should be for European Union. And it is distorted, because in my opinion it's distorted, and I'm not going to say that migration is not important, but our view towards migration is distorted, and our mode of functioning, where we want to protect ourselves from China, from United States, from migration, and we stop to see how important the rule of law is, and we do not think that our values and standards in the closest neighborhood of Europe are not important. This is really dangerous, and it has great implications. One of them is that Russia is becoming to be perceived as the lesser evil. I would like to talk about more concrete things right now. It is not a coincidence that a small verbal trick where we say that sanctions are linked to the implementation of Minsk agreements, or that they are linked to a progress towards the implementation of Minsk Agreement, because we know that as long as we talk about a process, as far as we talk about the need for the agreement to be implemented, then we know that until the agreement is implemented, there will be sanctions. But when we start to talk about progress, well, that's dangerous. What does progress mean? The question might be posed, what is progress? Exchange of prisoners. Is that a progress? We have a situation where Russia is giving back people who were unlawfully captured and brought to prison, and Ukrainians give back war prisoners, and this process is called exchange of prisoners. Is this progress? Or is it something understandable from the point of view of Zelensky, but is it kind of our common failure? Is this really a message that we would like to send? As long as you need someone, just pick one person from Ukraine, bring it to prison, and then we'll have a prisoner exchange, and you'll get back your war prisoners. In this context, Steinmeier formula, which says that there are some choices made in separatist republics, and when the choices are made, the law is passed, making sure that the republics are autonomous, that they have right to their own police, and we all know what the word police means in that context. If these choices are deemed lawful, then these rights stay with us forever. There are lots of doubts whether we will have enough political power so that if the choices are not democratic, and it's really hard to imagine for me that they could be democratic, then it will be really hard for Ukraine to be able to remove the law giving autonomy to separatists. To wrap up, I've always thought that the Minsk agreements should never be implemented because it's impossible to implement them and they are dangerous for Ukraine. Today, I have the impression that the implementation of these agreements, also according to the Steinmeier's formula, is becoming even more dangerous because it means that in Europe, in Western world, people are okay with the fact that some standards are breached. people can turn a blind eye to some standards being broken in the name of some bigger causes. We might lift sanctions. This way of thinking is visible in Europe. And it's really dangerous.
Dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Now I will ask Nicolas de Lacoste to make some kind of reference to what we've heard from Madame Pełczyńska-Nałęcz. Would you really so that yourself and France thinks that the Steinmeier's formula is associated with really closing the eyes to the values that theoretically should be the foundation of international relations in Europe? And I will also ask you, well, you can often hear it from Ukrainian politicians and experts, namely Western European states, and when we hear this, most often people think about Germany and France, do too little for Ukraine, and they do too little to stop Russia from continuation of its very aggressive politics, or even spreading these politics on other neighbors. So the pressure on Belarus is increasing, for example. And a symptom of such a threat were also the words of Zelensky in the discussion with Trump that we know from this transcript, that France and Germany have done little, have done next to nothing, or at least this is the way it was phrased.
Thank you very much. Of course, there are two sides on your question. First of all, the Minsk Agreement. The Minsk Agreement, it is clearly said that they will be implemented when Ukraine will get back the control of its international border with Russia. So, Minsk Agreement, it is Ukraine getting back to the border with Russia. And if we say implementing of the Minsk Agreement, it means as well this part of the agreement to which Russia has signed and which is something that obliges it. On the Steinmeier formula, as you know, the body which is supposed to say if the elections were democratically or is the OSCE, is the ODIHR, which has its here in Warsaw. There will be an international body which will decide or which will assess the legitimacy of the elections and the legitimacy of the people who will be elected in. I haven't heard the comment. So this is for I don't think that somebody this morning spoke about federalization. There is no federalization in the Minsk Agreement. It's a kind of decentralization. Of course, the Russian side might have some understanding of decentralization, which is closest to federalization than we, the German and the French and the Ukrainian side, of course, have in mind. But this is important. We have seen some papers coming from America, from the United States, of course, when it is said that France is not involved enough. I mean, it's really difficult to know what we could do more as far as the involvement of our highest authorities, President Hollande, President Macron today, to get this end of the conflict in Donbass. The amount of time and frustration, to be very honest, of my colleagues dealing with the dossier in Paris and those working with whom we work on a daily basis in Berlin is really difficult to depict. So I think this involvement is known in Ukraine, is known in Russia. We are now working on a possible summit in the Normandy format, which should take place in the coming weeks. Of course, the discussions today in Minsk, we'll see if we are getting closer to a new summit of the four presidents. The Minsk Agreement and the Normandy format are helping these contacts being made, and in such they have their value. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. And my third question in this round of questions to Viktor, and I will start with two questions. And the first one will be associated with what we've just heard about. The Steinmeier's formula, so much spoken about recently. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine also talked about it, and afterwards he made it more precise, explaining that if we were to stick to Steinmeier's formula, it would require some kind of detailing, greater precision. What kind of detailing, precision, from the point of view of Ukrainian authorities, will be required, acceptable? And this question is associated with the second part, namely, what are the priorities of the foreign policy of the current government, taking account of certain issues in the execution of the policy, and how do they look like in the context of the agenda of Poroshenko and previous government?
Can understand what Mr. Prestaiko said about the formula, because he said a lot of different things. The question of formula, I think it's the lack of competence in journalists and experts circles has brought to the situation when everybody is talking of the formula. You have to know that for the moment Ukraine has a law which regulates how these territories occupied should be managed. This law is adopted by the parliament. This law is enacted and will be enacted till the end of this year. And under this law, they have special forces, they have their elections by themselves, and so on. This is a law. So, when somebody is saying of the new betrayal or other things, it's not relevant, because we adopted that law for the Minsk agreements in 2014. After they were signed in the parliament, we adopted the law. We also pushed the changes to the constitution, and here Mr. Nicolas is not right, because the question of federalization or creating the autonomous subject is the obvious agenda target of the Russians. These territories should be managed in different way that other territories are. With a special a lot of influence, and we have had a lot of debates whether they should also influence our international politics. So, if to say about the formula is like the way to find how can the end of this Minsk agreements come true. When we step all the through positions and we come to the final position of the elections, how that election should look like. But the question is about all the 11 other points that we should reach before. And the first point, the secure environment, and there is no more shellings, is not achieved. So it's like, talks on different levels, which actually have nothing for the moment with the reality. Even if he would sign that formula, okay, so what should happen? They don't stop shelling, they don't stop kill people, and so on. So the progress in Stanitsa became already a regress, then again a progress, then again a regress. When I served in Donetsk region, I already on my memory had like 4 or 5 times when we have the peace about the shellings. We have the school peace, the Christmas peace, Eastern peace, and so on. So the question is not about the formula. Yes, the question is about this first step when the Minsk agreements become reality. They are not for the moment. And the first step is the stop of shellings. When the situation becomes secure, the Minsk will start to move. And the formula is like one point which we should reach. The debate about formula is, and the risk of that formula is that the law takes power when we are not there, because the formula supposes that actually we are not controlling that territory. The elections go before we take control, and this actually what formula means, that first elections, then control. So, and the law should work as interim before the ODIHR will say that, okay, the elections are good. I don't know how they will manage to do that, if there will be like OSCE monitoring the shellings. So, we call them blind people. Yes, and they're very, very much ineffective in what they are doing. So I would not say that formula should be a topic of today's agenda. So it's some instrument, very small. The question is how to stop the shellings. And in this regard, actually, I would like to go to a more general level, which for me is totally missed by politicians of the whole countries. So what are the targets of Russia in this war? Why Russians should go for the peace? Yes, so they want to have a peace with Ukraine or what? Or why they started that war? If then, okay, today they will go for peace. Did they achieve their interests? No. So the Russians, they have two interests. The first, I call the small relevant interest, is to protect the issue of Crimea. Well, to make it a part of Russia for everybody, and that everybody should recognize that. If they achieve this interest, then they go for peace in Donbass, because it's logically, yes, so we go for peace here, and you refuse from Crimea, and all of you Europeans close your eyes about that, and we'll see what will happen in 100 years. The second, the huge interest, it's a big deal. And actually they are moving to that interest of big deal. And the big deal is saying that, look, here's your European border, and here is the sphere of Russian interest. Don't go here because you don't understand the states. You will not succeed here. You will never control this, and you can create only the situation worse. And they move to the second interest for the moment. And we see that everybody would like to have a deal with Russia because, the financial crisis, the China creates a lot of problems, and so on. So let's avoid that China and Russians would create some union or other things. Let's find some possibility to deal with them about that issue. So both of these interests are not achieved. So why Russians should go for the peace? I don't understand. Of course, it's only a part of their game, or diplomatic game, and other things, because it's a long-term story. So with this, some steps they move, like exchange of prisoners. It's only a way to a little bit avoid sanctions, to reduce the sanctions. They want to show some easy steps. We call this a strategy of Lukashenko. Because Lukashenko in 2008, he showed some progress, the sanctions were stopped, then he pushed all the meetings, and then sanctions were renewed. Then again, he showed some programs, sanctions are stopped, and then again, he's doing what he wants. So it's a part of the game. And of course, Russians now, they start to feel some huge technological problems, especially in the space development and other things, as they want to little bit avoid sanctions. They show some peace steps, they avoid it, they will get some new technologies and other things, and they will come back, because the interests are not achieved. Why they started all this mess if they didn't achieve the interest? Okay, and the second question was about agenda of Mr. Zelensky. So Mr. Zelensky is a very lucky person, and you can see is not only during the elections. So I would say that he is relying on his luck in most of his political actions. Yes, but of course it's not the way the politics should be. So he is a little bit under pressure of so-called Poroshenko institutions. So he is now in the process of Poroshenko inertia. Yeah, because a lot of things were pushed by Poroshenko, and he is inside that process. So, of course, a lot of things for the moment looks like continuation of the politics of Poroshenko. But this situation will change anyway, because Zelensky is totally another person. And, of course, he is now looking for the right people to have in team. He is testing the people, like the Daniluk who resigned, who was fired yesterday, I guess. So he will change also a lot of people before he will create his team. But his positions are very abstract, that Ukraine is a part of West, so that he should not bargain on the interest of sovereignty, because he also understands that this will undermine Ukraine. And you have to understand that implementation of Minsk will undermine Ukraine. We will have a Somalia close to the Europe. And this is the point that should be understood by everybody. And so he is looking in the West direction. He's a very pro-Western guy. But what differs? He really considers that we Ukrainians should do a lot to achieve something. Because before, the foreign politics looked like we are begging everybody to help without doing anything. So he really wants to change this approach. He wants to talk from the position to say homework done, from the things achieved. Yes, if he wants to ask somebody, he wants to show that, look, we did the things and now you can help us. So this is, I would say, the key points. And the last remarks, I would also to join the answer to your question to Ms. Katarzyna, that what actually the Europeans should do about Ukraine and the Eastern Partnership. The first point is that Ukraine didn't use 7 billion euros of aid for 5 years. We didn't use because we were not able. Of course, we were able to steal it, but if there was no possibility, so we didn't use it. So in this regard, and also I know that in other countries also there is a lot of money which are not used by the state because state has not enough capacity to fulfill the projects. So in my institute, we developed the new idea and the new approach that the European Union should change the politics of giving money to the projects and create the investment insurance fund and put this international financial aid in that insurance fund and allow investors to go and to make projects in that states with insurance in that fund. So you want to invest 1 billion to Ukraine, you go to that fund, you make agreement, and the fund creates insurance for you in case if somebody will happens to your business or with you or with other things. So the fund will repay you all the investment. So this will create the wave of investment and the huge technology companies which can come and really create the big projects. I think in every country, in all the Eastern Partnership, it could be a huge process. And another story is big infrastructural projects which can more tighten the countries and create more interrelations between them. For example, in Ukraine this year, next year, we plan to allocate money for that. We want to push the river route from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea. This is called the E40 route. And of course, we can do this only from our side, only part of job. The other part should be done by Belarusians, but they also want to push that project because they are interested to push the river transportation because it's very beneficial for them. And then the Polish should also do a lot to create the possibility to come ships to the Baltic Sea. With this, of course, Ukraine, for example, and Belarusians become more tied to European Union. And this politics, of course, brings them more dependent on what the things are going on in the European Union, what kind of politics and so on. So they will look more to the European Union with different infrastructural projects which cover the states.
Dziękuję. Czas nam pozwala jeszcze na trzeci.
Thank you very much. We have still time for the third round of questions. This time they will be really short and quick. Nicolas de Lacoste, the question to you. It regards Crimea. Well, sanctions were placed after the annexation of Crimea. Then we had Donbas, and sanctions were complemented, but the point of departure was Crimea. However, we have not talked about Crimea at all today. I have the impression that Crimea has been removed from the agenda also on top levels. Am I right? And is it not the case that the potential tacit compromise is this tacit understanding, well, let's not talk about Crimea?
Adopted sanctions on Crimea, and there is absolutely no way we are going to leave these sanctions. We will not recognize the annexation of Crimea by Russia. We repeat this on several different premises, on several occasions at the UN, in all occasions which are possible, and there is no kind of discussion with the Russian on this issue, let me tell you very frankly.
Dziękuję. Viktor Andrusiv.
Thank you. Viktor Andrusiv. Question concerning American-Russian, Ukrainian relations. America has become one of the most important campaign topics in America. What are implications of this situation for the situation of Ukraine?
The previous elections too. So I would say that the process just continues. It's actually hard to say because things which are happening in the US actually are not depend on us. I mean, we're just like object in the battle between Trump and Biden, or who will be from the Democrats. I would say that we are just a card which is used by the sides, of course. And as far as I know, Zelensky would like to avoid any possibility to be a part of that battle. So he would like to not to help anybody in that situation. But this process was inspired by our former prosecutor general, who actually visited Washington on April, I guess, and in March, and said that, okay, Trump, I can help you with all this. So it was his personal game about to preserve position. And now he created a lot of inconveniences for everybody. I think there will be some practical consequences of all this. I think that actually the published dialogue between Trump and Zelensky from his side didn't do anything what can be treated as illegal or other things. So, and Trump was acting like a Trump. It's also nothing new about what he is saying and the manner in which he is doing the things. So for the moment, I don't see any perspective. It's only informational battles between two camps. And so I hope in next month they will find new issue for that battle and forget about us.
Dziękuję. I panią Katarzynę Pełczyńską-Nałęcz poproszę o odpowiedź.
And now a question to our third panelist. This question is a privilege of the host. It is a privilege of the host to insert into the debate a topic which is particularly interesting from the point of view of the host himself. Polish-Ukrainian relations. There was a certain freeze in relations during the second part of Poroshenko's term. Do you see any possibility to reopen these relations after the change in power? Well, I cannot give you a short answer to this question, but I just need to add something to what's been said on Trump. Well, some say that it's enough if Ukraine does not support any camp in America. But that's not only about America. Well, it's just another step related to the fact that the European and Western values have been compromised. and it's in our best interest for Ukraine to go forward with reforms, and this process is not easier if the President of the United States behaves towards the President of Ukraine as if he was the President of Russia. I am not saying that Trump behaves like Putin, but I just want to suggest that what Trump said was really horrible. He put Zelensky in a trap regarding a conflict with the European Union. He provoked Zelensky to say something negative about the European Union. Of course, it was not Trump's idea to reveal the transcript, but it was revealed, and this led to the deterioration of relations between Ukraine and the European Union. And I would like to defend Zelensky in that situation, because it was really difficult for him not to say what he said. Nevertheless, what he said will not be forgotten in France, in Paris. And this conflict, or this misunderstanding, these bad emotions which were evoked as a result of this transcript being revealed between Ukraine and European Union, this is a great loss and a memento for all of us. We need to be cautious, we need to be careful, and we cannot get involved in such discussions by Trump. This was an anti-European provocation, and support from the USA will not follow. I think that in Kiev there is no big regret because of the fact that Central and Eastern Europe's position within the European Union is weaker now. This a gap which is mounting between Western Europe and Eastern Central Europe, this so-called new, although not so new Europe, is becoming weaker, and it's bad for Ukraine because, well, Poland is the biggest country in Central Eastern Ukraine. We should be most determined. If we are not ready and if we do not have the right resources to fight, to talk about the issue of Eastern Partnership and Ukraine, if we are not able to place this problem on the top of European agenda, this means that Europe has a great problem. Of course, a lot of things would have to happen for our voice to become heard, but one of most important elements is the state of relations between Poland and Ukraine. If we are not in touch, if President Zelensky, and that's not an accusation, okay, he's going to Brussels. Good. Then he goes to Berlin, to Canada, and then he comes to Poland on the occasion of a multilateral and not bilateral occasion. This means we have a huge problem. We have a misunderstanding. We have a limbo and a weakening of bilateral relations, which is detrimental for both sides. We need tools to have the right pro-European narrative. We need to uphold sanctions, and Ukraine loses an important ally. And this ally, despite all his drawbacks, still is really important. Now it's time for you. Now it's time for questions from you. Please introduce yourselves, ask a short question and address this question to one of the panelists. Good afternoon, Henryk Bienkowski. Thank you. Particularly, my thanks go to Ms. Ambassador. I've got two questions. One to our guest from France, a question on Crimea. I think we should talk about Crimea if the situation of permanent annexation of Crimea is confirmed. Does this mean that France will uphold sanctions permanently as well? And the second question to Ambassador, you mentioned the European aspect. You talked about commissioners, and I'd like to talk about another body, European Parliament. Please give us your subjective opinion of this new situation. We've got Minister Waszczykowski. What will be the influence of this situation on the relations between Ukraine and Poland, as well as Ukraine and European Union? Ryszard Bobrowski, Przegląd Środkowoeuropejski. I've got two questions. The first one to Director. You said something interesting. You said that the changes taking place in Russia might be a beginning, might bring some hope that there will be some initiatives. You were posted there, you know the situation. It's interesting for me to hear to listen to what you're saying, but as far as I follow the news, it turns out that even during manifestations against Kremlin, even Navalny says nothing about the restoration of Crimea, the return of Crimea to Ukraine, but maybe there is some hope. If yes, please present it to us. And the second question, if I may, to our guest from France concerning Crimea as well. Well, I'd like very much to have a situation, just like you said, where France consistently supports sanctions because of Crimea and its annexation. But we all know that French MPs visited Crimea, confirmed the French presence there and the interest of France in that region. Moreover, President Macron said a lot of things about Poland, bad about Poland, and I haven't heard him talking about a visit to Moscow to protest against the occupation of Crimea. Thank you. Okay, we will answer the questions first.
Powiedz na pierwsze pytanie tak.
The answer to the first question, yes. The answer to the second question, I don't really understand the connection. I'm sorry, but...
Mówił, zdaje się, o...
Macron talked about the fight against climate change and the fact that the youth in European countries could protest and express their opinions. Also here in Warsaw, asked for the position on Crimea. I've said it already, we don't acknowledge the annexation. And if I could, one word, Madam Ambassador said that the painful words would not be forgotten in Paris. Well, namely, as for the relation between the President Macron and Zelensky, this is rather good relation, and Volodymyr Zelensky already visited Paris twice, once as a candidate, second as a first foreign trip, and I don't think that there was some leak from Washington that might change the personal relation between the two young politicians. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Well, shall it be this way? Because it's really important how the words will be understood, perceived in Europe, and how not purposeful intrigue by Trump, put in a... how to say it? Wedge, yes, this is the word. How putting the wedge, or how splitting Ukraine from Europe failed. Well, a simple thing on the sanctions. Will the sanctions be maintained if Crimea is not returned. Well, sanctions on Crimea or associated with Crimea, symbolic, small, not significant. The only important sanctions are those associated with the Minsk agreements. And surely the Crimea sanctions should be maintained. But politically speaking, this is only a symbol. What is realistic, what is really tangible, are those sanctions associated with Minsk issue. It's normal, not the first time it happens that Poland in the European Parliament, Polish politician is responsible for Ukraine or talks on Ukraine issues in the European Parliament. But the problem is how Poland is perceived today by the majority of members of the European Parliament, and how much Poland is seen as a credible partner, and how credible Poland seems in the context of promotion of European standards in the neighbourhood. Well, we know what the answer would be. Poland is not perceived as a credible state, and the fact, a rather twisted one, good, natural solution may be not necessarily so useful, so beneficial for Ukraine. And well, another issue, what positives can we expect internally in Russia, in Russian politics on Ukraine? I cannot imagine any Russian leadership. We have to say it clearly. Any leadership that would give Crimea back, whether it's hypothetic a leader of Navalny or a hypothetic leader of the opposition, irrespective of how you understand opposition. It's not possible for a Russian politician. You like it or you dislike it, you just have to acknowledge it. However, what I'm saying is like creeping fraction in Russian functioning, Russian regime functioning, and Russian trust in the regime. I mean, this crack is getting wider and wider, and at the moment when the regime is weaker, its potential would shrink, especially that already now the mechanism, we mobilize on the idea of a big imperium has been used, consumed, and you can't really see that the nation will get together because of this communication. I don't know whether weak Russia is worse or better than strong Russia, which one is more dangerous, but the regime undermined by its own internal crack is less effective vis-a-vis Ukraine, and the politically speaking, but also demographically speaking, old politician is far less effective and far less convincing for Ukrainians that are young, fresh, dynamic, and for Putin, this is a gigantic image problem. I will encourage you to ask questions. Tomasz Orłowski, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Well, I feel sort of asked to speak up by Director Pełczyńska-Nałęcz with her description of Polish-Ukrainian context during recent months. If you allow me, I would try to make a little correction. I would like to remind you that before the first meeting of Zelensky and Duda, this meeting took place at the beginning of June this year. True, at the time of the first foreign trip of Zelensky to Brussels, but already then the contact was made. And before that contact, there were also two discussions between Minister Czaputowicz and Zelensky. Obviously, these discussions had a very specific format during inauguration, and then bilateral visit of the Polish and Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs in Kiev, and the visit of Zelensky's in Warsaw at the end of August was a fully official visit. It wasn't sort of automatically associated with the commemoration of the 18th anniversary of the outbreak of Second World War. No, it was a separate visit. It was a fully official visit. And a question in front? Well, the situation in Donbass for a long time has been stable, well, far from what we would expect, what we would wish. But it's not to say that nothing happens. Russia started the problem of navigation through Kerchensky Strait, and the problem is this instrument of blocking the strait, treating the Kerch Strait as non-possible area. Can it be used? And if there is such an attempt, what we, as the EU or the West, could do here, some additional sanctions? Or, the gun that Russia is still holding, can it shoot one day? And if yes, what could we do?
I jeszcze jedno mamy pytanie.
Dzień dobry, Żaneta Dela.
Żaneta Dela, I would have a question to you concerning the potential widening of the Normandy format. As such a widening, would it be effective, justified? And I would like to know your opinion about it and the position of Poland, Ukraine and France on that issue. Thank you. Thank you very much. So perhaps first, Viktor.
Well, the blockade of the occupied territories was a huge mistake of Mr. Poroshenko and has far-going consequences for bringing the peace there. Last year, our institute, we held the focus group on the occupied territories. And we found a very tremendous and an anxious trend that they are looking for their own identity. They are not treating themselves as Russians and never were. They always thought of themselves as Ukrainians, but with special, requirements. And now they in a situation where they consider that Russia will not take us and we will not go back. So they started the process of looking for their identity. They organized some groups who are looking for specialities of their language. They changed the treating of the history of the region and so on. So this is not already done, but this process started. Maybe one of the curious things is that the most what are they against of is peacekeepers. So they are totally against the peacekeeping operation on their territory. So the blockade finally damaged the possibility to reintegrate them very much. And in June, I proposed to the former Secretary of the National Security Council to change the blockade and to introduce, we call it a membrane blockade, when they can come to Ukraine and buy all they want, as much as they want, and take everything they want with themselves, but they cannot sell any of their products before they will not give back us stolen enterprises. Yeah, so we introduced that model, and I asked him to push that. The people should feel that we need them. We want to have them back. And all this actually damaged the possibility of reintegration very much. And of course, they are not ruling the situation, and normally the Russians are ruling all the things. And the Russians are still have under control the whole information space and other things. So the Russians create the way of thinking, the attitude to all the things. For example, it's how they should relate to the Minsk process. The Russians will tell them through their channels, it's good or bad. When it's time to say that the process is good, they say, okay, this is good. The same about Zelensky. So the Russians tell them how to relate to Zelensky, what the kind of attitude they should have to Zelensky, good or bad. But for the moment, Russians actually don't know what kind of their own relation to Zelensky. Yeah, so this is the problem. The question is what the European Union or Poland can do. When I served there, we had a very good idea, which actually failed because of the European side.
The idea was that a lot of people migrate through the front line. It's 100,000. And the idea was that, for example, Poland or some European states can take cities or can take some regions and be mentors of the territories to help them with governing, with trainings, with bringing experts, and try to develop the territories which are close to the front line, that people from the occupied territories can see quick changes. If they would come and see the situation is changed, of course they would go back with another attitude. Because, and this is the most key finding of our focus group made on occupied territories, that actually they don't treat situation as bad, because the situation for them was bad when it was hot phase of war, and they compare all their life, even now it's an awful life, it's a small money, it's nothing. They compare only to that period of hot phase. They understand that it can be more worse than it is. But the key feeling, the key problem, they don't see the future of their life. They don't know the future, and they don't see the future of these republics and so on. So if we could show them that the situation can be different, when they come, they see another situation, this could change a lot.
The question was also, are the Russians limiting the freedom of movement through this Kerch Strait?
Yes, the Azov Sea will be, and our institute predicted this conflict a half a year before. We published recommendations to the Poroshenko what the steps should be done to avoid that conflict, and the situation will become worse. With this blocking the Azov Sea, the Russians will create for us a huge problem for Mariupol and for Berdyansk. And it's huge factories. This is the pressure on Akhmetov, of course, for the first position. And then, of course, it's the pressure for the local society. For the inhabitants of Mariupol and the Trojans. The problem is that we don't have enough infrastructure in case of Russians will block the sea at all. So we are not be able to, for example, take the steel or other products from Mariupol to Mykolaiv or Odessa seaports. And this is a new big dangerous game of Russians, because they threat with this to the local economy. And of course it's a challenge to the state, because the investment in the new infrastructure are around $7 billion of dollars. So we don't have that money. And the question is, you see, what is the problem? If you do not treat this conflict as a long term, you never have a will to push that money, because you all the time expect that in the years the conflict will be ended. So what for we need to, for example, to build the new railway? It's a huge investment, yes, to the new railway from Mariupol to Odessa. And it's for we in our institute, we consider that the conflict should be recognized as a long term. It should be recognized that this is a long-term conflict, and then the state, the IDPs, the European Union, everybody will change the behavior about how to deal with this problem. Because for the moment, 5 years already, every year we start with the belief that by the end of this year we will have a huge successful progress in the peace situation. But the situation goes worse. Regarding the Crimea, the sanction on Crimea almost have no effect because Russians changed the strategy, and now Crimea will be a military base. And the sanctions are related only to the local economics of Crimea, enterprises and so on. And there will be no economics. They already replaced 300,000 people in Crimea with the military. So this is normally military with the families. They create huge military factories. They bring a lot of weapons and so on. So Crimea will be a huge military base in the Black Sea. So it's not possible to release it with some military steps or sanctions. This will be not possible. So the Russians are playing the game. And as I said before, they have two basic interests. And before they will not reach, they will not show any progress.
Dziękuję. I pytanie o format normandzki, o jego
Thank you. And a question about the Normandy format, its extension.
On the Normandy format, we have heard some proposals before the elections in Ukraine, before the presidential election, during the presidential elections, after the presidential elections. Some of the political leaders in Ukraine have advocated for having a format which would encompass other actors, not to mention them, the US, UK, others, Poland. What we see lately is, from the Ukrainian side at least, rather the will to invest as much as possible of effort in the format as it is. But of course, this format must deliver. I think Minister Pristaikos said that he gave 6 more months to the format to deliver. We have a president who likes to have results. We are not going to get involved in this resolution for years and years. So let's see. But for now, this is something that is working a little bit better than used to work, and I think we should give it a chance.
A czy Polska powinna się starać o...
Should Poland try to become member of the format? Short answer, no. And the longer answer is, well, Normandy format cannot be changed. It's a very hypothetical debate. But the primary sin was committed when the format was created, and it was a neglect on the side of Europe, also Poland. There is no representative of the European Union in the format. It doesn't have to be Poland. It can be France, Germany, anyone. Normandy format became format of countries, and it's as Russia prefers it to be. Russia prefers to talk to individual countries rather than with the European Union, because Russia would have to talk about with the European Union on an equal footing, and it's easier for them to talk with individual countries, and it's a failure of Poland and other European countries. We do not have a representative of the European Union as such, irrespective of what country this representative would come from. But this is something we cannot change, in my opinion, right now. I think that Mr. Orłowski was right. Well, that's true what you said. The relations between Poland and Ukraine after the election of Zelensky are more intense. But I think that the Polish president should be present when Mr. Zelensky was sworn in. We have still time for one short question from our audience, if there is any. Good afternoon. My name is Valentin Hantarenko. This is not a short question, but I try to make it as concise as possible. I'd like to talk about integration of Belarus and Russia. We can see that this integration is active right now, and there is a chance that Belarus will be incorporated in Russia soon. A question to all our experts: are you aware of this risk? Are you aware of the fact that Ukraine will have Russia on 3 sides: Crimea, Belarus, and Russia itself? Poland will also have additional borders with Russia. The entire European Union will have a border with Russia as well. Do you realize that it's really serious? Viktor Andrusiv.
Russia is a captured state. With Russians, we already treat them in that way. However, formally, of course, the things did not happen. In 2017, we prepared a special report for Mr. Klimkin about the strategy with how to deal with Belarus. And the situation was very bad because our analysis showed that the only way to preserve Belarus neutrality was to make Lukashenko stronger. Because otherwise, any new possible politician in Belarus will finish formally this union. And Lukashenko was actually looking for the special maneuver, economic and different with European Union and Ukraine, to have additional space of movement against Russians, but we did not create these things for him, and not from the side of European Union, not from the side of Ukraine. So finally, he was facing Putin just alone, and of course he failed to win this pressure. And for this moment, we consider that Belarus should not be treated as a neutral state, and we try to consider the situation in the new security strategy as a new security threat to Ukraine.
Wbiła godzina 14.
Well, it's 2 p.m. Time is over. Unfortunately, we need to put an end to the panel. I'd like to thank our participants, Katarzyna Pełczyńska-Nałęcz, Viktor Andrusiv, Madeleine Corand. I had the pleasure to moderate the two debates. Thank you for your attention.